Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gina from the Special EU Programmes Body, and we had the wonderful opportunity to hear from Travis May over the last couple of months, because we were working with a potential project for our Peace Plus programme, and it was all to do with cyber up in the northwest. And through MasterCard, and I'd like to extend a thanks to Gavin Henderson from MasterCard, he introduced us to Travis, and they're working on this project idea. So Travis then spoke to us several times, and we were just completely enthralled with what he was telling us and the awareness that he brought to us, that we thought, well, we really have to get him over. So he talked at our event this morning, which was the first sort of introductory meeting on Peace Plus, and trying to see if we can plant any germs of inspiration. I shouldn't say germs when I see medical people in the room, but germs of inspiration for future projects, so that we can bring in some of the new technologies and how they can be used. And it was really interesting this morning, some of the real practical examples that Travis gave us. Travis is from Texas. He's over 2 decades experience of creating, building and leading programmes from intelligence, learning and development, training and workforce innovation. He's a recognised expert in extended reality, XR, immersive and augmented, and you'll notice I have to read all these words because they're all quite foreign to me, technology and innovation, having led early development efforts with immersive technologies for MasterCard. With several awards in his field, and including St. Louis Business Journal 40 Under 40 and Security Systems News 40 Under 40, and that is literally just 2 of a very long list. Travis is currently working with Groove Jones, and he works with all the clients there and develops strategies to address critical priorities ranging from education, training, marketing and the future of work. And it's just that we were absolutely enthralled with what we heard, and I hope that you will be as well. And I know that people this morning were maybe a bit shocked. It's a bit scary as well, some of this, but a little bit shocked, but certainly it's been a success when that's all that's talked about at the lunchroom. So with that, I'd like to introduce Travis and thank him very much for making the journey here to talk to us.
Thank you, Gina. So thank you, everybody, for having me out. I think I went a little bit over this morning, and so I'll warn with this, you get a geek up to talk about geeky stuff, and we'll take up all the time that you have, and you have to pull a futz off stage. So so some of the topics that we'll talk about it'll be kind of arranged, mostly focused on innovation, but also some solutions, what's happening in our current environment, technology, evolution of technologies. Some of it can be scary, some of it should be scary, but there's also hope in there too, and hopefully that culminates in the end that there's actually strategies, or there's some ways that can be implemented, and the way that you can approach some of this to actually produce positive outcomes for it. So titled the talk, Best of Times, the Worst of Times, A Tale of Two Cities, with the pivot to Tale of Two Futures, in that even currently with everything that's happening throughout all industries with technology, with innovation, both challenges and opportunities, it's vastly different depending on what's occurring, what industry, who they have involved, whether they're aware of the disruptions or not. And ultimately the decisions that we make now with everything that we're about to talk about, everything that we probably feel, whether we consciously know everything that's happening or not, the decisions that we make now will have monumental impacts, not only in our lives, but really it's going to be our next generation's lives and beyond. The decisions whether to act or not, what we choose to focus on, how we implement it, will have immediate implementations, but ultimately lay the groundwork for better or worse for everything that's to come. And it's happening much faster than we think. So to give us a little bit of a framework for this, and an analogy that we'll use throughout the presentation, we'll take a look back at the first industrial revolution, and more specifically, life in America. So in kind of a 60-year time frame, early around the first industrial revolution for Americans, we're going to break it up into 2 sections, and it's a 60-year period broken up into 2 30-year sections. Take a look. So if you take the first section of life in America between 1860 and 1890, that 30-year period. Majority of Americans were in two trades. They were either in agriculture or in industry. If you were in agriculture, your life was pretty much from dawn to dusk. You spent all day working on crops or tending to animals. If you were in industry, it was typically 10 to 12-hour days in a factory, extremely hard work, unsafe living conditions, very unhealthy in general. But life during this time was very focused on family and your individual community. The education at this time was not mandatory, but a large majority of Americans did attend school, especially in the cities. Education was fixated on math, reading, writing, arithmetic, and religious studies. And for the characterization of that lifestyle, work was central to your daily life, very little leisure time, but still a very dedication to your community, family, traditional values were very much a part of daily life and what influenced you. And so technology was definitely a part and evolving during that, but your life was very simple. You dial the clocks forward 30 years past that. So that was 1860 to 1890. 1890 to 1920, industrialization had started to ramp up significantly. As factories and factory production ramped up, a mass migration from an agrarian and rural lifestyle came from the countryside and into the cities. That impacted everything as far as the social fabric. It impacted everything in industry. The social fabric during that time frame of being closely tied into your community and family and traditional values was ultimately uprooted as well. And although some of that migrated over, but just the very nature of the environment going back into the cities, into industrialization for a better life, shifted and changed everything as well. So during that time period, you had technological revolutions, even beyond just that social component, but the factories and what got produced, everything changed from communication and from transportation. So communication, the advent of the radio and the telephone came during this time period. The airplane and vehicles came during this time period. So with that evolution, if you think about the time frame that they were in for that industrial revolution, if somebody was born in the late 1860s, they experienced all of that change. So you literally went from electricity, you went from what lit your house was candlelight, your transportation was walking or a horse, you lived in rural America surrounded by farmland or animals, tied closely into your community, to living in the city, industrialization. You were walking earlier in your life, and now you're seeing planes fly through the air. You're seeing cars come across, this magical voodoo thing fly into the air where I can hear people say they had to think, thought life was crazy, into the world type, but everything had changed. Every part of society and the way they worked and they lived and had lasting impact throughout the world. Most countries went through an evolution like this during the first industrial revolution. And so we live in similar times, and there's definitely parallels that can be drawn. And I'll retouch on some of this, but ultimately we're approaching a period where there's mass change happening in every aspect of our lives, both socially and in industry, that is currently changing the pace, what we focus on, how we approach things in every aspect as well. So at that time period for the Industrial Revolution, there was one component that really was a catalyst for the change there in the actual factory and the rise of industrialization. It was the steam engine. So 1869, the steam engine was invented, and so, 1769, the steam engine was invented. When it was first utilized in factories, the way it was deployed is it was put centrally in the middle of the factory. It was attached by a series of belts and pulleys and systems to attach all the subsequent machines throughout the factory to power those all throughout the factory. There was the more important or power-hungry machines were all positioned closer to the steam engine itself because there was a power loss as it got further away, and so the less important or less power-hungry machines were all positioned further away from the actual centrally located steam engine. So the steam engine itself dictated the entire layout. So in 1834, the electric motor was invented, but it wasn't until 1880 that they started to make their way into the factories. And when they did that, so a lot of times they took the steam engine out and put the electric motor in place, utilizing the same business processes, thought process about how that actually occurred and how you operated a factory. It was probably the least effective utilization of the electric engine. It did show improvements in effectiveness or efficiency, but not near to the point based off of those legacy business processes that the steam engine did. So from 1880 to 1910, so 1910, the vast majority of manufacturing facilities had an electric engine, and something happened then. As soon as the exposure kind of propagated throughout, a lot of the engineers and the factory workers started to play around with the electric engines and motors and started to experiment with how they were utilized and the layout and what was possible with them. And what they discovered during that was that they could take the electric motors and put them at the individual machines, and that they didn't need to be centrally located, and that they could individually power each machine. It revolutionized it. Now no longer was this centrally located steam engine dictating the entire factory layout. That allowed them to completely revisit and reimagine how that actually operated. The assembly line was born out of that. It gave rise to more effective and efficient ways of doing things. And by doing the individual components or motor power, they had other things like they didn't have to power down the entire factory if that issue with one machine. They could stop individual, but fluctuate the power output. But it ultimately revolutionized everything, and that's where things were born out of that were not possible before it, in that you got the assembly lines, you got the new factories, which all gave birth to different innovations and trains and automobiles and planes, and had all this cascading effect. It took one of the components in there, it took 30 years though. So it was implemented, the electric motor was implemented in 1880, but it took till 1910 before they had that realization that there's a different way that this can be utilized. It took 30 years to break down paradigms and to think differently about how do we actually conduct this? What does it mean? Can we rethink how we're deploying this, and what does that mean? And as soon as it happened, all these subsequent innovations and technologies and revolutionary things came. But it was stuck in legacy thinking or paradigm thinking, not only technology, and it's important too as we talk about this, technology doesn't fix things. You don't just throw things against the problems and expect it to fix it. The business processes and how you implement those things and how it affects industries is almost equally as important, maybe even primary as well. So there's two quotes that I absolutely love. Mark Twain famously said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes." And if you couple that with Winston Churchill's, "The further backwards you understand, the further forward you can see," and the importance of research and understanding what's happened and correlating that to extract processes and insights and trends and patterns that you can overlay on current times, with Mark Twain's assessment that it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So my dad was an avid lover of history, and so that became a part of me and my DNA growing up, always reading and exploring and analyzing. It served me really well in my first parts of my career as an intelligence analyst in the Marine Corps. I loved the research. I loved the analysis. I loved peering into the dark recesses of information to extract trends or patterns that could inform our decisions over time. Research and forecasting was very much a part of, and then implementing was very much a part of those early parts of my career, but born out of that kind of that historical perspective. I would end up doing 2 tours in Iraq, then spend 4 years in Afghanistan with the US government doing intelligence, and then I'd migrate over to the corporate world where ultimately I build 2 programs from the ground up, redesign and reconfigure 3 other ones, but really heavy in R&D, innovation. I led biometric authentication, virtual reality, augmented reality, future of learning, future of work, robotics, drones, and got to play with, explore, test, and build a variety of different things for future of work and future of learning applications. And then something happened during the later part of that. Is in 2017, we started our family, the 2 little boys, which ultimately changed everything in that now became a layer. And as fascinating as all that world was and is, I started to then look at it through the lens of, what does this mean for my kids? As they start to grow up through all of this, what does the world look like? What challenges will they have? What opportunities will they have? What solutions will they have at their disposal? How will that impact everything that we do? But then as a parent looking at that, and what world are we creating for them? And with everything that's occurring right now and all the variety of different things that are impacting us and innovations, and it seems overwhelming, it can be important to step back and look at the foundational components. And as this is moving, understanding foundational logic and helping that guide or instruct our decisions and what we focus on is going to become even more critical. And so one of those is innovation. So what is it? Where does it come from? Is it a problem looking for a solution, or a solution looking for a problem, or a combination of both? There's an author, Clay Christensen, who wrote Innovator's Dilemma and subsequent book, Innovator's Solution, who he frames it up in 2 different definitions. And he was the one who coined disruptive innovation. But he frames it up as there's 2 realms of innovation. There's sustainable innovation, as defined by micro improvements upon existing processes or solutions, in that you're taking something that already exists and you're improving it incrementally. And then disruptive innovation, which is usually something that's at the bottom of a market that comes up and it ends up disrupting, toppling whatever the legacy or incumbent was. And there's even another theory that's starting to arise now to help frame that that's not entirely binary like that, but there's a non-disruptive innovation category to help people understand and help us frame all the variety of different aspects that are out there. But a non-disruptive innovation might be somewhere in the middle, where it didn't disrupt a legacy. There really wasn't a legacy or an incumbent, but it was something completely new. So the correctable prescription eyeglasses would be one. There really wasn't an incumbent per se before that. You just didn't have good eyesight. And as that was born, it was a new thing that ended up creating an entirely different market. So looking at his first book, Clay Christensen, between sustainable innovation and disruptive innovation, that first book really focused on, he took a number of different companies and he wanted to look at ones that were disrupted. So he specifically honed in and did case studies in the work of, here's a company, they're dominant in their market, they're at the top of their game, they own that market, they have great financials, they have great management, good thought leadership, it's intelligent, and they ended up getting completely sideswiped or disrupted by something coming up, in that they either didn't exist anymore, it completely wiped them off, and I guess Blockbuster is still around, but the Netflix and Blockbuster, the Kodak versus digital, and looking at how did that even happen? By all logical sense, they owned that and had everything going for them. How does a company or somebody in a position like that completely get sideswiped by it? And he dove in, and there's a lot of great findings in there, but one of the key components that he looked at and extrapolated was that when it came to the management, there was a couple things that manifested that seemed to be common throughout every one of those, and how it manifested that they were so grossly disrupted. And that one of them was they either ignored disruptive innovation, and okay, great, cool. Kodak's case would have been that they saw the digital camera early and they dismissed it, or they fought disruptive innovation. that they pushed against it and chose not to accept any component of it. And those were two common themes. And there was even a manifestation out of that it came down to more of a personal. So how does that happen within that organization to where they might even see logic or merit in whatever that is, and how do they still fall into the category where they got so grossly disrupted? And so looked at, there was a lot of times there was a managerial decision in there in that they saw it, but the sustainable innovation, the incumbent, is really tough to beat. It's already in your organization. Everybody's familiar with it. You know that if I do X, Y, and Z, it's going to move this a few degrees here, and I know what I'm going to get. You have data and metrics, and it's easy. The disruptive innovation has no metrics. It has no historical data. It's an unknown in a lot of cases. And so it seems really risky. And when it came down to, like, all right, so my performance review is coming up at the end of the year. My bonus is aside. I'm up for promotion here pretty soon too. I can either go with what I know works and the sustainable innovation, this micro improvement upon an existing, where I can take a chance over here and potentially risk all of it. And so oftentimes they were pivoting towards the safe bet, even knowing that it was a short-term vision, but it was going to sacrifice long-term. There was a little bit of a safety net in there too, as they had time. A lot of the times the decisions didn't see the repercussions or the consequences of it. There was time for that to evolve, and so they maybe got through a few performance reviews and maybe left that position where by the time the consequences really hit. And there's an important component in this, in that the evolution, the rapid evolution of what we're seeing now, we don't have time for the steam or for the electric motor to be introduced into the factories, taking 30 years before they realize that they can rethink of it in entirely different ways. 30-year gap, we don't have that anymore. It's moving way faster than any of that. So taking that and looking at all the different components that we have in our society, in our businesses, in our workforce, and being overwhelmed a bit with everything that's occurring, framing that to help understand what's happening, why it's happening, why now, in that it seems for all of us, we've just kind of out of the blue started to have sci-fi type technologies. We've had where we didn't have widespread AI till we do. We didn't have biometric authentication till we do. Video conferencing, was it? Self-driving vehicles, robotics, drones. All of a sudden, just out of the last few years, we had it. And years prior, we didn't. So to help frame that up or understand it, 3 professors from MIT helped describe it or framed it up to help understand what's happened, where are we at now, and where is it going. And so it was Ray Kurzweil, Andrew McAfee, and Eric Bjorson who kind of developed the story, and it really starts with stepping back into Moore's Law and understanding technological evolution. So Moore's Law is been around for about 50 years, and the theory initially that it was the number of transistors on an integrated chip would double every 18 to 24 months. Why that's important is those transistors on the integrated chip power everything, power all of our devices, all of our technology, and bring life to everything that we have. And so the doubling of that every 18 to 24 months, which he was correct, for the last 50 years, like clockwork, it has been doubling. And so what that does is it either doubles the power or capability that we had in that time period, and the opposite is the capabilities that you have now just came 50% off or half as expensive to do. So with both of those happening, and every 18 to 24 months, we're doubling our capacity and the expense is coming down, why now? So that's been occurring for 50 years. What happened that just all of a sudden we're seeing sci-fi technologies? And so they framed it up in the story of chess, and to help us understand and at least give us some sort of conceptualization about what's occurring. So with the chess and the origin of the chess in the story is that the inventor of chess brought his invention to the Emperor of India, and He was so impressed by this incredible strategy game that he offered a reward. He said, this is amazing. You can have whatever reward you want. You name it. And so, guys, I'm a humble farmer. I'll just take rice as my reward. And we'll figure out how much rice by using the chessboard is we'll put 1 grain of rice on the first square, and we'll put 2 grains of rice on the second square, and then we'll double that and put 4 grains of rice on the next, and we'll continue to double the previous square with the next square until we fill all 64 squares, and then I'll be happy. And on the surface, we're like, that's awesome, rice for this, we got it. The problem is when you get to the 64th square, it's more rice than what's ever been produced in the history of mankind. If you were to pile it up, it's a pile of rice bigger than Mount Everest. It could cover the continent of India in a few feet of rice. It's just, the thing is it doesn't start to get to the crazy numbers until about halfway through the chessboard. When you get to halfway, 32 squares, it's about 4 billion grains of rice. And that might sound like a lot, but it's a small elephant train, maybe a few large fields of rice. It's not till you cross that halfway point where it starts to exponentially increase. And Andrew McAfee and Eric Bjorson tried to estimate, and so they did some what they call non-scientific calculations. All right, so if we subscribe to that model, and you can see how Moore's law kind of plays into that, where it's the doubling every square and the doubling of capabilities in transistor chip, and so that holds true. And so they said, so where are we? If we subscribe to that as kind of an analogy to help us understand what's happening with Moore's laws, where are we on the chessboard? So what their estimation was, in around 2006 to 2007, we crossed over into the second half of that chessboard. And so I think 2007 is when the Apple iPhone, the smartphone, was invented and came out. And so you look at everything that's happened there, and if you subscribe to that kind of pattern analogy or framework and the doubling component of that, you have to believe we've seen nothing yet, in that all of a sudden we have the flying vehicles. All of a sudden we have self-driving vehicles. All of a sudden Starship, SpaceX, it did their first test launch. It's going to take us to the moon and then to Mars. All of a sudden we're having all this crazy. But if that is true, double all of that. And that's why we're starting to see this just kind of rapid expansion of crazy stuff that we can't keep up with. And one of those being AI. So we look at AI. AI's been around for a while. It's one of those technologies that I believe everybody's starting to realize that it's touching and permeating just about everything. But OpenAI has really been the catalyst, OpenAI ChatGPT, that really kind of launched the conversation. Because the large language models then became real as more people could touch it, and it started to correlate, like, all right, I see how this potentially could shape up into something that I can use. The first month that they launched, they had 1 million users. 2.5 months in, they had 100 million users. It's the fastest growing software platform on the face of the earth. What they're estimating, I think there was it was late last month, or early last month, somebody had come up with a report that these language models are doubling in their capacity every 48 hours. That there's hundreds of applications every few days that are associated, coming out into the marketplace, that are associated with these large language models. We used to measure innovation, evolution in years and decades. We're getting really close to we're measuring it in days and hours. And how do you even keep up with 100 new applications that are launching into the marketplace, whether it's for social use or marketplace use? The thing is it's going to be amazing and terrifying all at once. We're now entering a period where we'll potentially have a chatbot, an AI chatbot that's a personal assistant to us. So we've been collecting a digital footprint and a digital self 10, 15 years now. Every email, phone conversation, medical device, our medical records are online. If you have some sort of Fitbit or heart rate tracking, that's been collecting data. You've been collecting a ton of data about yourself for a long time now. It's just, we've had mountains of data, which was a revolution in and of itself with the Internet of Things. But then very quickly, we're like, crap, I got all this data. I have no idea even what to do with it. And there's a quote that I'll have, usually an abundance of data results in a poverty of attention. And that became very true very quick. Well, now we've got an AI solution that can potentially make sense of all of that, correlate it in ways that we've never been able to before at an individual level. So you can have this AI personal assistant that knows you better than you know yourself, knows patterns of life, knows how what you did yesterday in relation to what you normally do and what you're about to do, how that's going to impact you, that you got a little bit less sleep, you had 2 beers, and that caused a 10-minute delay in you getting up, and a rather curt email the next day, and can compensate in your daily life for those. It will be communicating with you in the best possible method. It will know you. It will know how you accept information. It will know what you like, what you don't, and it will transmit information to you that's helpful in the best way. That you're a visual learner, you correlate to history, and it will be able to craft those messages. It will be affirming to you. Unless you wanted it to argue with you, it won't argue with you. It will always be positive with you. Again, it will give you helpful stuff. You know what, you're really stressed out, and you know what, I'm correlating with the rest of your family too. I know their patterns of life. They're a little bit stressed out, maybe as a relation to what you were doing, and you guys really liked this beach vacation. I know, because I looked at your heart rate monitors and pupil dilation and everything. So you really liked this beach vacation that you had last year. I've actually looked at your schedule. I found a discount special, whatever. I booked it, cleared your schedule, and you guys are leaving. It will be amazing. At the same time, there could be a period very quickly after that launches that you wouldn't know if that was your idea or not. You would legitimately say, did I decide that? It could seed and plant ideas imperceptible to you that you would have no clue whether it was doing it or not, and change human behavior for better or worse. It could change human outcomes. There's a variety, there's no shortage of, if you go Google dystopian chat GPT conversations, it's by far not perfect. Gives really biased, bad advice, gives amazing advice as well. So and I would encourage anybody who hasn't seen Tristan Harris's conversations or talks, he's out on YouTube. He was a Google AI ethicist, and he's been a vocal critic for where we're at right now. And he sheds a lot of light on the state of the technology, how it's impacting things, and what we need to be careful about. That stuff is going to come all at once. A lot of these technologies, it's all coming all at once, in that the good and the bad, and we can't compensate for. We can hypothesize what the negative implications would be, but even when you're addressing that, especially with legacy models, by the time you address that, it's already moved 2 or 3 degrees beyond what you thought it was, and you're solving problems that are obsolete in all intents and purpose. So another component of the chat GPT to show impact. So GPT, by all intents and purpose, 2.5, 3 years ago, didn't exist. So something from a disruptive comes up from the bottom and topples. So Google had to respond. The juggernaut Google that nobody thought could compete with them had to respond and release their AI chat GPT equivalent early, which is by most counts significantly underperforming what GPT and threatening Google's model and a bunch of different industries. So 2.5 years topples a giant like that, with a bunch of other industries that are affected by the components. So ultimately, what does it mean? We have to think differently. Something like that to take out Google, if you dial the clocks back 5 years, everybody thought they had time. I bet everybody at Google did. We'll see it on the horizon. We'll see it coming. We'll see the problem and we'll be able to respond. We'll either buy the company or we'll spin up another team to compete with it. It happened like that. Whether they saw it or not, it still disrupted them in a major way. It's happening much faster. It requires different thinking. Albert Einstein's quote, "We can't solve significant problems in life at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them." It's more relevant now than it ever has been. We have to think differently about the challenges we're facing and about how we solve and what we implement and the speed. The legacy protracted innovation cycles are broken in that we don't have as much time as we used to about test, learn, wait, analyze over a 6-month time period. It doesn't mean that we throw caution to the wind and throw risk models out. We just have to condense that. The timeline horizons for what we thought are much shorter than what Ray Kurzweil predicted a couple years ago, that we'd have generative AI in 30 years. And he was laughed out of the room. Now it's now been calculated, I think it's under 10 years, and that's part of the evolution of AI evolving beyond what we thought was possible now. So we have to think differently, we have to act differently. Some of those components are going to be multiple areas, in that we have to communicate faster, we have to move faster, we have to engage faster and differently. Skill development is going to be one of those components. So you can have skills and you can have amazing things and you can have amazing projects or programs or solutions. Half of the battle is engagement. So if you have really cool products, marketing or training or education solutions, if you can't get anybody to pay attention to it, you can't get anybody to consume that information and do something with it, you've kind of lost. You've spent a lot of time and money in an area that's not really going to produce an ROI. And part of that is understanding what does engagement look like, what is effective. So Todd Maddox, a neuroscientist field, has been doing a lot of research on the effectiveness of the brain, especially with immersive technologies, and published a lot of white papers. And he talks about the differences in the way that we engage people as in correlation with immersive technologies. We have been scaling for several years now 2D tech, 2D papers, 2D engagements. The challenge with is it's all prefrontal cortex and frontal lobe heavy. That's our more developed brain. That's where the refined thinking happens. It's where a lot of great thinking happens, but it's leaky, it's got memory issues, got attention issues. The challenge is it's not to a fault of our own, we've been needing to scale engagement or scale solutions and training or education or marketing to larger audiences, and 2D is all we've had. So with this evolution of technologies, there's new opportunities to rethink that, but ultimately, even with the 2D, we try to get real creative with engaging, having that broader limbic resonance where we're getting funny or shorter or more emotional or more bombastic of whatever we're doing. And we're essentially trying to tap into the emotional behavior and experiential centers of the brain and have that broader limbic resonance. Because we know from the beginning of time, if I take you, and immersive learning essentially is way more impactful, and I can pick you up and put you in an area where you're surrounded by whatever the content is, you're going to learn it way better than if I'm giving you a PowerPoint and give you something to read. It's just, it hasn't been scalable, potentially dangerous, and potentially expensive to do anything with immersive components like that. That's where we've seen these evolutions in technology start to unlock 3D potential and immersive capabilities. So if we've got kind of a crisis on our hand where we need to pivot to doing more effective engagements as well as rapid skill development and pivot, we are 3D creatures. We understand the world in 3D in the context of it. We just never had the opportunity. So those types of things where we're going to have to learn faster, we're going to have more learning agility, we're going to have that stick with you, and we're going to have to increase engagement, are going to be critical if we're going to address the challenges that we have with emerging technologies and the impact that they're having. We have to rethink, but fortunately there is rising solutions out of this that might lend itself to. And so we're going to focus for the rest of this on some other industry perspectives on how they're leveraging these technologies to solve some of that. Social proof sometimes can be extremely powerful. One is it brings awareness to, I never even knew that was possible. But then two is, I definitely see components of that in challenges that I'm experiencing, and to see other people building, exploring can unlock some of those for organizations. So take a look at immersive technology specifically, but emerging technologies as a part of it to help address engagement and skill development. So this is a Victory XR Dissection Lab. So it's a virtual reality simulation that you put a headset on, and essentially I think they got 5 or 6 different animals, a pig, a shark, a frog, and you're in this lab, and this hologram pops up of this professor, and she starts guiding you through. You can pick up the frog and wiggle it around, the legs all flop around, put it down, grab a scalpel, cut the frog open, take the pins, pull out all the individual components. That's expensive to do in real life. Most kids don't get that experience anymore. It's messy. It requires somebody who really understands that to actually teach the subject matter. So a lot of schools, for a variety of reasons, no longer do this for those things. In virtual reality, every kid or every person has access to that type of experience. It's perfect, it's instant, and it's exploratory. They can go through it as many times as they want. Labster is another virtual reality simulation that puts medical equipment and laboratory equipment, multi-million-dollar laboratory equipment in a virtual simulation to where most university and research universities wouldn't have access to most of this. Anybody can put the headset on, they can explore, experiment, play with, learn all of these different, all this different equipment, and have access to all the different elements. So even that they wouldn't even have, even if they had this equipment in there that they potentially wouldn't even have in real life, they can make stuff explode, explore completely, and now leveling the playing field for that type of research and development and that exploratory and that part of the STEM as far as our education and trying to propagate that at scale, bringing what's not even possible in real life. So Mona Lisa, I like to say that I was severely underwhelmed when I saw it the first time. Here's this iconic piece of culture that everybody's heard about. If you can fight the crowds and get close enough to the 10-foot off rope distance and the multiple panes of glass, it's much smaller than you think it is. So another company had developed this experience in virtual reality. So you actually start out in the courtyard outside of the Louvre. You go down to the Louvre and you're in the hall leading up to the Mona Lisa exhibit. You can look at different paintings and things. You peel into the corner and it simulates all the people and then melts them away. You walk up to the Mona Lisa. It starts bringing out videos and pictures and give you context and voice and telling you about the history. And the Mona Lisa pops out and comes out to life size a couple of feet in front of you. And you can walk around it and you can see the wood grain and the poplar wood and where the split happened that takes the layers and peels them apart and shows you different components that throughout time, the reverberations and things that have happened. And then at some point she pops out and you can walk around and look at her and then the Louvre melts away and you're standing on the terrace where it was painted. So taking the depth of that story beyond what could ever possibly be done in real life and giving context unlike you've ever been able to do before and connecting people with that story at scale. It's in a virtual simulation and anybody put a headset on, they can go experience it. Multiplayer virtual reality. So this is one of the final projects that I had worked on in corporate America with it, was we were exploring before COVID, future of work and future of learning. So I put a headset on in virtual reality. Can I connect people into a virtual simulation, multiple people for a variety of different outcomes? So I put a headset on in Texas, somebody in Dublin puts a headset on, somebody in Belfast puts a headset on, somebody in India puts a headset, and we're all standing in the same virtual room, seeing each other, talking to each other, seeing body mannerisms. We can do post-it notes and planning sessions and write on whiteboards and drop 3D objects and scale those out and collaborate, and you can record it all in 3D as well. And so if there's other team members, you want to go back and reference it, it records the entire session in 3D as a file. You or somebody else in the future clicks on that, and you pop up kind of Ghost of Christmas Past, and you're standing there as though you were part of the original conversation, hearing the things that happen. So future of work, future of learning that served us well because we tested throughout COVID, sending headsets out to remote staff and bringing them together. And there's a variety of, so Oxford University's got the Bodleian Library in here, NASA's been exploring with it, multiple universities, but having that experience as we become dispersed throughout the globe, and especially with remote working, how do you make those more meaningful and do things even that you wouldn't be able to do in real life, to even conferences. So this is Imperial College of London. So they've been doing a lot of advanced stuff with immersive technologies and what's possible, not only in the medical field, but also in the training aspects of educating students and getting them prepared to enter the medical field. So this is an augmented reality overlay. So it's using that little marker as an indicator to populate a wound on an actual person's leg. And what they're seeing is there's broader engagement limbically, and the kids are associating more emotion and more of the experiential component by seeing that wound displayed on an actual person's leg than just watching a video or seeing a picture of it. So they published this a couple years ago. One of the studies that they did was they had a knee surgical procedure in a lab that they took the student body and they split them in two. And group A was trained in all the traditional modalities, textbooks, videos, PowerPoints, instructor-led, and the group B was trained in virtual reality. And then after the training periods, they put them into the lab, and one of the key metrics that they wanted to look at was who could complete the lab with the least amount of assistance. And so the ones that were trained in virtual reality, 83% of them could complete the entire lab with very little to no assistance. Those that were trained in the traditional 2D modalities, not one could complete the lab without needing some sort of reference or assistance through that. So that wasn't a minor improvement or a micro improvement upon that was drastic. So they've also produced, and it's one of the things that I love about their work is they publish a lot of their stuff openly of here's what we did, here was the challenge, here's what we did, and here was the outcome. And one of the other statistics that came out of a parallel study from this was that the surgeons and the medical professionals coming out of the virtual reality training were around 230% better than those that did not. And that's not a small number. So any of the industries that have required hands-on, anything that's been expensive, dangerous, or impossible to do in real life, have been seeing drastic ROI from the beginning in virtual simulations, VR, AR, Web 3D. Any of those I have to physically touch because you can scale. And so it was really readily apparent early on that those are incredible use cases, safety training, oil field, things like that, incredible. So the question was always, well, okay, got it. That naturally makes sense. So what about industries that you don't put hands on, or soft skills or human communication? So PwC did a study where they trained soft skills in virtual reality and published their findings after it. And what they were finding is 4 times faster the training in virtual reality than in the classroom, 275% more confident to apply skills, almost 4% more emotionally connected, and 4% more focused than their peers. And then they also published the cost comparative in that. That's one of the follow-on questions. Well, it's expensive to do. And so they broke it down at about 375 learners in VR training achieved cost parity with classroom, and about 2,000 learners VR training achieved cost parity with e-learning. And then the follow-on effectiveness of it. So what is that ROI compared to what you're doing now in the micro improvements, and you're spending money and time and effort, but having very little impact? It's cheaper. This is having greater impact for micro cost comparative or a cost additive to that training, but then over time, and if you have to scale it, it drastically improves the metrics. So I'm actually back this one up, set it up. So other people that were exploring early on, in 2015 isn't necessarily early on, but it was one of the catalysts too that got people to start asking, well, something's happening psychologically with people that are in the virtual simulations, and they're connecting to the content and the stories deeper. So this is a mini little documentary that the International Humanitarian Pledging Conference had set up back in 2015, Clouds of Sindra. So it's a 360 camera following a little girl in the Syrian refugee camp around, that when you put on a headset, you can look around and it seems like you're there and you're following her, and she narrated the experience in that. She's like, hey, this is where we line up for school. This is the tent in the little house that our family eats in, and here's my papa, and here's our food. And so it was like a 5-minute experience, and what they were estimating and hoping they'd get $1.6 billion in investment, and they almost doubled it, getting $3.8 billion. And one of the key components that they had changed, really the main thing that they had changed versus legacy modalities of videos and documentation and pictures, is putting this short little VR experience that was just 360 camera, almost doubled their revenue and their donation. And that was a huge red flag for a lot of people in the industry. Saying, I'm sure they were hopeful that it would have an impact, but nobody really understood the depth of the impact, where that was emotionally connecting people to that story, unlike they were ever able to do, to the point where they were choosing to give their money over at double the rate almost. And so that started to raise interest in that there's something happening here where people are, it's creating empathy and they're connecting with that story in deeper ways. So this next one is Modelo is a beer company that's pretty popular in the United States, and they came to Groove Jones, and they're going to do a Day of the Dead celebration where they wanted to put a mural up on the side of the wall to celebrate Day of the Dead. They're going to put it in 4 markets over a 2-month period, and essentially it's augmented reality mural. So the picture goes up and somebody scans it and it comes out to life in 3D and has some fun music. She grabs a beer, pops it, and hands it to you. So 4 markets, 2 months. One of the key metrics that they look at for traditional marketing material like 2D is dwell time. So the average dwell time for 2D printed material for them was about 45 seconds that somebody kind of looks at it and, oh, okay, cool. This had 2 to 3 minutes for the augmented reality mural engagement, that people were walking around and looking at it. Any market that it was in for those 2 months had a 16.5% increase in sales. And there was no educational component in it. It was just a fun 3D thing that came to life and popped a beer. There was no, our water is the purest water and comes from whatever lake with the process, or our beer is the best. It was just a 3D fun thing that people chose to spend 2 to 3 minutes engaging with and walking around with, and it changed user behavior and purchasing behavior in that they either went out and bought Modelo, or the next time they were in proximity, they were still top of mind. So it's resonating in ways that have been unachievable in years past with the traditional technologies and modalities. So we'll play as kind of a creation of. So this next one is Ideal. Ideal Industries is a electrician tool manufacturing company, but they partnered up and created a technology and education component. But they teamed up, so the U.S. Electricians Guild and the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics recently published that in the United States, we're losing about 10,000 electricians every year, and we're only getting about 6,000 in. And so it's presented multiple problems for the electricians industry and trades industry for the United States. But one of those for the electrician industry is, how do we attract the younger generations? And then even as we attract those, we're losing the institutional knowledge faster than we can even train the new ones coming in to just keep them on par with how to do their job now, let alone as it evolves. How do we address this? How do we attract the younger generations in? How do we capture and transfer that knowledge fast enough that we don't lose it and then be able to keep up with it? And there's multiple challenges, even layers beyond that, in that for electricians training, there's only so much that you can learn out of books and videos before you need to get in some sort of lab and start pulling wire and cutting it and running conduit and getting hands-on. The challenge with that is there's only so many facilities to host that training. There's only so many instructors, and a lot of the instructors end up getting pulled from the field for operational work to go instruct. Not all instructors are the same. They're not all great, and even the great ones can have things that affect them where they start to get hungrier watching their clock for picking up the kids later in the day, and it starts to degrade. And then there's a cost associated too with those facilities. As they're pulling wire and cutting it and running conduit, there's an ongoing cost. Those facilities are only open for certain amounts of time, and so they only have time and money and instructors available for X amount of days, 3, 4, 7 days, where they're bringing these students in, and it's a dump on them, and hopefully they'll retain some of that before they go throw them out into the apprenticeship. And so what Ideal Industries developed was what they were hoping as the future of electrician training. So they created 5 modules in virtual reality, basic electrician training, and it's broken into 2 modalities. So put the headset on, you click, all right, I'm going to do a light bulb, or I'm going to do a 2-way switch, and you pop up in an apartment complex, and the first mode is guided, where it says, all right, you're going to install a 2-way switch. Here's a little diode board, you can go through blueprints and next steps, and it says, here, go grab that green wire, attach it with the blue wire, cut 2 feet of it, run it over here, and little arrows, and so it guides them through every step. They can go through that as many times as they want, whenever they want, regardless if a facility is open or instructors there. It's the same training, high quality every single time, regardless of where they're at, regardless of what time. Then there's a second mode in there where it tests them in that says, all right, you're going to install a 2-way switch, go. And they have to go through all of the steps of cut the green wire, run it over here, and then it grades them and ties into a learning management system in the background. They've expanded into over 300 community colleges, and now they're going up into Canada. Different components of that is one can do the impossible. They'd know where to get close to having access to all of that equipment whenever they wanted, to those types of immersive simulations as many times as they wanted. You can do the impossible in there, in that in real life training, there's a certain point where they're like, all right, stop. If you do that, that's going to catch on fire. That person's going to get electrocuted. You're going to burn this whole place down. In virtual reality, you can electrocute the kids all day long, and they can start to get, it's funny is I say that every time, and I know the sadists are that start laughing about the idea of electrocuting kids. But the point in that is the consequential learning, the making mistakes, which is usually the more impactful one, because it hits you and it sticks with you and it's emotional. But there's limitations in the real world. There's guardrails that you have to put up even from a safety perspective, that you wouldn't even let them cross that, but you can simulate those types of things where it hits them and it's impactful in a virtual simulation. Sorry, I'm going to play the video. So what's important to note about this as well is it's not replacing in-person, in the lab training. It's augmenting it so that they can go through this, get hands-on, learn through all of these things as many times as they want through immersive training, have it stick with them so that when they actually go to the facility, it's not the first time they've seen that. The questions that they have are much more refined and educated. The time that they spend there is more effective than if they were just showing up and asking basic questions. So IBM, supply chain issues and conferences and the ability to get their technology out into the world for advertising and selling their equipment has obviously become a challenge over the last several years. So one of the solutions they looked at is Web 3D and augmented reality. So taking their new P10 servers that they're wanting to sell to clients and recreating it in 3D, or their quantum computers recreating it in 3D so that anybody with a mobile device, a smart device, can pull it up, can move it all around, zoom in or out, look at different perspectives, open doors, drawers, look at it, hit on different little hot spots, but then they can also take a button and press augmented reality and it drops that server, that quantum computer life size in their space. So it's right here with us and you can walk around it, look at it, hit a button, it opens the door, pull out a drawer, pull out a chipset, look at the chipset. It's got 2D content and videos and audio as though they were actually physically with that piece of equipment. So it started off as a sales tool and rapidly can evolve into the onboarding of staff to get them familiar and acquainted with their technologies and their equipment, and a learning tool as well. Lexus and Toyota, similar challenges, getting equipment, supply chain, getting it out, getting people and vehicles onto their lots and people out to them. Talent shortages for effective salespeople that can guide people through the vehicle, apprehension from those who are being sold to fully explore, led to them first exploring with recreating their vehicles in Web 3D, that you can do all the same thing. You can drop the vehicle down in augmented reality in your living room or in your car park and walk around it and explore it. And then that transitioned into the future of user manuals. So they're looking at these big, thick user manuals that are all 2D, fine print that nobody looks at anymore. They're still required to put them in there. If anybody wants to know something, they're Googling or YouTubing, and they're still spending vast amounts of money on these books to throw it in the glove box and nobody looks at it anymore. So they pivoted to looking at it in Web 3D and augmented reality. Can we recreate this, put it in augmented reality where somebody can sit on their couch, drop it as a cockpit around them and learn about their vehicle in a 3D manner that's way more natural and visually congruent with what they're knowing about what the challenges are or what's aligned with their own vehicle. Can this be the future of user manuals? And I think they published that they're saving somewhere around $7 million a year by doing this in augmented reality or Web 3D. So virtual speech. It's a virtual reality public speaking training simulation. So this one, put a headset on, and their first product offering was you put the headset on, it's got a microphone in the front of it, and you're standing on stage. So it's the representation on the top left. And the audience is populated with real people that have been recorded, kind of green screen and dropped in. And so they're all moving around and drinking coffee and looking at you to create that kind of realistic presence. You're standing on stage. You can incorporate your presentation there so you can see it, but eventually you hit play and you give your presentation and then stop. And it pops up a scoreboard. And through the microphone and through the understanding of that headset and respect of your presence on that stage, so all right, you had 10 ums, 16 buts. We couldn't even hear you in the beginning. You were really soft in the middle. You had 3 really pregnant pauses in there. You only looked over here 20% of the time. You never even looked over here. And then if you do multiple sessions, it can trend you over time and say that you're getting better or worse at any one of that. But they also have another mode in there where you can say, guide me through the presentation. And when you hit start, it's a hey, arrow, look this way. Speak up a little bit, I can't hear you. Look this way. And it can guide you, so you start to develop that muscle memory component in there. So then they expanded their product offerings to different situations where you would be presenting or giving talks, and one of them is you pop up and you're at a boardroom table and there's several people eagerly looking at you and shaking their head, and you have to present as though you're giving some sort of boardroom presentation. And then there's another one where it's interviewing and there's 3 people grilling you with questions, and it's doing all the same or similar calculations, how you say, what you say, your presence, your eye contact, and then giving you feedback through all of that. So there was a program that we developed when I was at the corporate environment, when we were developing virtual reality simulation for sales training. And it was a prototype that we were looking at. This is 2018. And it was for the sales team out in Dubai. And they're like, we want to see kind of where we're at with conducting sales training in virtual reality, and what can we do, and would it be effective? And so the simulation is you put the headset on and you go up to the boardroom, and there's the potential client sitting across and a couple of other workers taking notes at the table, and he greets you, you say hello, and you sit down, and the product that we were evaluating was that actual artificial intelligence type product. And so through that conversation, it's very branched in that the avatar asks a question and you respond, but it's grading in the background. That product that you're pitching, you should be hitting these keywords in there somewhere. So in the background, it's listening for those words, and it's plus or minusing and giving you a grade that you're effectively selling that product to the avatar. So feedback from it, incredible technology, really creative presence. They really liked having that ability to have a discussion where it felt natural without having to go through role playing. There's another element in there for that role playing. For certain types of training that you really need somebody to kind of bounce the things back and forth in the role playing, there was a psychological safety component that arose out of other people doing these types of role playing scenarios, in that, especially if it's in a corporate environment or any type of environment where you know the people, that people don't actually perform the way they would in real life for the psychological safety component of like, hey, if I say something stupid, I've got to see them tomorrow, and I don't want to be judged. And so they don't actually naturally, where in virtual reality with these avatars, they had that separation and they could go through it, and they were actually acting and performing more naturally than what they were through role-playing scenarios. And so one of the things that was happening with that sales training is the feedback was, we need the conversation to be more natural. So that's not how our actual sales presentation actually goes in real life. It's not linear. Hey, tell me about your product. Tell you, that sounds great. It's more all over the place. Like, hey, before we get started, tell me about that bar or that restaurant last night. How was that food? And how do you take those conversations and come back and work it in more naturally? It's just the challenge at that time was the natural language processing, and being able to pick up on dialects and things just wasn't there. And so for virtual speech, that was true as well, until it wasn't. And so ChatGPT launching late last fall, the experimentation with this earlier this year, they integrated ChatGPT with a representation of an avatar in their simulation, and you're able to have a dialogue with the chatbot that understands what you're saying, how you're saying it. And so there's a couple of different videos out there. The one that I have here is not the one that, but they tee up the conversation with the ChatGPT avatar of like, hey, all right, so we're going to debate on remote work versus in office, and I'm going to be a proponent for remote work. You're going to be in opposition or more for in office, and go. And so the other video, the ChatGPT avatar comes back and says, hey, that sounds like a great debate topic. I've been there before. So tell me though, are we talking about just a period of time, like a pandemic for remote work, or are we talking about like remote work ongoing as the future of work? Because that's a great, but the component in there is the AI algorithm, the chatbot understood context to even qualify that question. So beyond just the, hey, I'm going to take back and forth, it pivoted and asked qualifying questions that weren't inherent into the original question. And so unlocking the capability.
It's great to see you today. What topic would you like to debate?
Hi Hugh, I'd like to talk about the benefits of remote work over office work. I'll be in favor of remote working and you'll be in favor of office working.
Great topic, Isa. As someone who has worked in both environments, I'm happy to take the side of office working. Let's begin.
So I'm not going to go through the whole video there, but the evolution of that and the overnight capabilities, you have it and then you didn't have it and then you do type aspects, fundamentally changing the possibilities and the complete trajectory of whole market and product offerings kind of overnight within months. And the timeline horizon for this stuff was years away. One technology integrated in, play with, bam. Nobody had it, and now everybody does. So that's a perfect example of the exponential growth that we're experiencing and the implications on almost everything just from AI alone. So this is Imperial College of London. It's one of their other virtual reality training simulations they're working with.
You're immediately thrust into this scenario. You've got this whole team around you, telling you all these bits of information about the patient that they're doing chest compressions on. And suddenly you just have questions coming up at you. There's a little timer in the corner as well, so you don't want to get it wrong. Do it for 2 minutes. They've brought the crash trolley.
When you see something like this, it's very, very different to the textbook. They've never seen this in real life, not been part of the team until they qualify as a doctor. So we're trying to get over that hurdle to enable the student to have experienced it. So when they actually see it in real life, this isn't the first time that they've seen it.
A parallel technology that does actually integrate into immersive technologies, haptics. So with all the amazing results that we're seeing with immersive technologies and connecting with human emotion, behavior, and experiential, and communicating and transferring knowledge faster and more effectively, and all the impacts that just a VR and AR simulation with tricking sight and sound. So sight, and my brain's starting to suspend reality, and I think that I'm here in this virtual simulation, and then spatial sound so that it sounds real, and then if a bird starts over here and flies around the room, I hear it as though it's actually real, sucking people into those experiences. To whereas Jeremy Bailenson, Stanford University professor out in California, that has been experimenting with the Human Behavior Lab and virtual reality and augmented reality, more virtual reality. He's a psychology profession by trade, and so he focuses in a lot on virtual reality, augmented reality, and the effects on humans and physiologically, psychologically. And he came out, I think, 2 years ago and said he's always been cautious about saying where we're at and the impact on the human brain and how it's affecting, but he's confident now that he's saying that what he's seeing is that the virtual simulations are getting so good that it's at or just below real physiological impact, in that people are believing and having physiological and psychological experiences comparable to as though they were there in real life. There's simulations where it's walk the plank, which is a little cult favorite of where it's on this high rise and there's these little wood boards that protrudes out from a building and it looks like 20 stories down or whatever, and there are all kinds of videos, people abusing it too with their friends and pushing them out, which I would not recommend for people's experiences, but people, they know with 100% of their mind and body, they're right here in this room. But standing there on that ledge, their knees get weak, your heart rate starts to go up as you're walking on this little wood plank and looking down. You know that's not real, but your brain has suspended reality entirely there to where you're behaving and acting like you're there. So those types of experiences are incredible, and it's tricking two senses. So haptics, combining touch. So Haptex, HAPTX, is a company that has gloves, and there's all these little tactile bubbles, if you will, on the palms, and they've experimented with water or air. And so these little bubbles on the hand or on the glove can be filled with varying degrees of air to simulate touch. So one application of it is in virtual reality. So you put it on, if there's a glass of water here, I reach out with the glove, and it puts pressure on my hand as though that glass is actually in my hand, and it's got force feedback that pulls my fingers back to feel kind of weight and resistance as though it was actually real. If I touch a pillow, I feel the pillow. But as I press down into the pillow, it starts to put pressure on the sides of the finger, so I feel depth of it. Some other simulations, you put your hand under and you feel rain on your hand. And so adding texture and adding touch, if you thought that we were doing incredible things of sucking people into experiences with two senses, you start adding touch. And so now they're in this process, the technology's real, it works, and now it's a miniaturization race. It's smaller, faster, better, more capable. I think they just launched their version 2 where they put a backpack on as opposed to this computer box. So you put a backpack on and you have the gloves. They also have another capability of telerobotics. And so there's a really cool video of Jeff Bezos out there trying the gloves on. So telerobotics and having gloves that you can manipulate robot hands at a different place isn't really anything new that has that capability, but they've integrated the haptics technology into it. You can feel what the robot hands feel. So they have simulations where you're moving the robot arms, you grab a little solo plastic cup that's really kind of soft, and they put a ball in there, and you grab one in the other hand, and you can feel the depth of what that robot hand is crushing that solo cup to where you need to release it so that it releases the ball. You shake somebody else's hand, the robot hand is shaking somebody's hand, but you feel it in the glove. And Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, in there, he geeks out. It's like, oh my goodness. And so it's a great little marketing ploy for them. But applications, they're using it extensively with US military medical training. So them being able to touch wounds and touch patients and be able to add that tactile sense of they're actually there and deepen that experience within the medical profession of working on somebody. And something they laugh about is, so this one obviously has a needle component into it, but I said every time that they do the simulation, somebody for the first time, they always take the needle out and they touch it, and those are just little bubbles, so it's not like they can even get close to the puncture pressure of like a needle, but it still freaks people out, like, oh my goodness. And obviously that actor in there, that avatar, was really calm. I'm sure they can dial that up to freaking out and flailing and stuff too. So culminating all of that, where do we go, or what's next, or how do we do this? And so you can take historical examples of revolutionary times where seemingly everything was changing, or even snapshots, and you can extrapolate trends, patterns, how people navigated those. You could take modern times and extrapolate that. So there's kind of about 5 key areas that have become essential for organizations. But the first one would be start with a clear vision. And what that means is truly be honest as much as we can be with everything that's here. Truly be honest of what does the future look like for whatever you're trying to solve. If it's education or skill building, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, what does that actually look like? Will the people consuming that still be using the legacy model? And that's okay if it is, just be honest about it. Or will it be something completely different? And as best as you can with the evolution of this stuff, project in the future. What will that future look like? How will consumers be engaging with this? What will the technology evolve with? And then that drives your funding and financial decisions and your strategy going forward. But being very clear about what does the future look like, and then driving towards that. So second would be a hybrid period. So there's probably very few times throughout history where those incumbents just completely replaced, take it out, put the new one in, and everything just went smoothly. So going back to the steam engine versus electric engine, that they didn't do that in most cases where they just took steam engine out, electric engine, and went with. There was a variety of different things where they had to continue with the legacy model alongside of the electric model, in that steam engines, maybe there was a lot of manufacturing facilities that they had invested heavily in steam engines, and it didn't make sense to just pull all the steam engines out and replace them with electricity. There was different electricity capacities in different areas. Smaller factories could implement the electric motors in much easier than large factories with multiple engines, but there was a hybrid period. So even some of the steam engines, the factories that adopted the electric motors, steam engines were really good for low power, low torque application. So they ended up taking the machines that needed low power, low torque, kept the steam engine in there, put those machines around that, powered everything else with electric motors. So there is a hybrid period that needs to be planned for, just like we were saying earlier, of it's probably not going to work with you just throw technology at the problem. The business processes and the process for which we do things has to evolve too, and has to accommodate that. So all the legacy things that we're doing aren't necessarily obsolete, and the change management could be a nightmare if you try to scrap all of that. There needs to be a calculated, integrated, hybrid period of where you're implementing things where it makes sense to your organization and what the outcomes you're desiring, alongside of legacy things that can also be your succession plan for implementations, and that you're planning and building the future alongside legacy things, and you can draw down the things that don't make sense that are legacy, keeping the ones that do while you grow into whatever's new. So hybrid periods are going to be extremely important. Embrace the change. And I think as you explore, hopefully this has at least planted seeds and opened people's eyes about possibilities of things. I think one of those main components out of this is people have to start paying attention to all of this. They have to start learning what these things are. What is blockchain? What is virtual reality? What is augmented reality? What is artificial intelligence? What are the capabilities? How are people using it? What does it mean then overlaid on your organization, whatever you're trying to achieve? What does it mean for better or worse? How will we potentially be disrupted in what we're currently pursuing with what we've got? How could we potentially take advantage of it and do things differently or better, or ascend to new heights and embrace it? It's likely here in your industry already. There's challenges that are becoming increasingly more challenging to try and solve. There's potential solutions in these things, but you can't even solve it if you don't know about it. Another component or a layer in there is these are exponential technologies in their own right. Another challenge with it is convergence and opportunity. Convergence. So you're taking some of these technologies and they're combining with others and creating whole new frontiers that can either be negatively disruptive if you don't understand it and how it applies to you, or create whole new frontiers for you to solve existing challenges or reposition yourself in the future. It's here in a lot of cases, and it's happening fast. So embrace the change. The legacy protracted innovation cycles that test and learn over long periods of time are broken and need to be reevaluated for shorter periods. Innovation cycles that use kind of an accelerator model of test and learn fast, either choose to shelve it, scrap it, or scale it. It's either right for us and just not the right time, shelve it and we'll work towards it, or it's not right for us, scrap it, or it is right for us and now let's grow it further. But you've got to embrace the change, and we don't have 30 years between the steam engine and electric motor. We don't have 30 years to test and wait. It's happening much faster than we can even conceptualize right now in a lot of cases. Focus on individual needs. There's a lot of evolutions in this stuff that can allow us to tailor individual solutions to the individual or to the individual application, much like the steam engine versus the electric engine or electric motor. Steam engine, mass solution for a mass variety of machines. Electric motor could be individually powering each machine. Similar applications are available now where you can tailor things to individual needs with some of the solutions that are out there. And then last is prioritize data and analytics. So historically, the way we decided whether our tribe would go to war or whether we would make decisions in the marketplace, you pivot back to kind of gut feeling, or whoever had the most experience, which served us well as a species for a long period of time. We've now got new technologies and data and metrics and solutions like AI or things that can help aggregate and tell stories, and a lot of data and analytics that can help inform our decisions. We may be over-indexed on the pure human reaction or understanding or gut feeling or intuition for a long period of time. We now have the opportunity to level that out and start using data and metrics and analytics in unique ways to help inform those decisions going forward. And a combination of all of that is where we're seeing organizations be more successful in navigating some of this disruptive change. And then lastly, think big, act small, move fast. In that it's important to look at all of this, and as you're looking at it for whatever you're trying to achieve, it's important to get that strategic vision or that roadmap all laid out, but then you got to pick something. And it's easy to get overwhelmed, and the more, it'll be a rabbit hole of it. The more you look at this and understand the possibilities of the different things, the more you see it in all things. Pick something. Pick one thing, two things, high impact, or a place where it's small enough that the solution might be small, but the implementation is in an area that's small enough they can get excited about a small change because it's big to them, and then test and grow it from there. But you have to start big, think about the strategic vision, pick something small, and get started, and you have to move fast. Those protracted innovation cycles, if it's over extended periods of time, by the time that you solve or doing the research over several months to understand, it's likely moved 2 or 3 steps beyond. So you have to get those teams in there and move faster. And that's all the time I'm going to take for that. So thank you. And I think we're good. Do we have time for questions? Or so I'll stay here for any questions. I think it then comes, first you have to create awareness and understanding. So looking at all the potential options, kind of that big picture, looking and understanding what the variety of different technologies or applications are, but then overlaying that, every organization and every need's a little bit different. And you can find parallels and others can help guide and shape, but every implementation, every organization is going to have their own marketplace values or implementations or challenges, as well as internal structure, organization, how you would actually bring something like that in. So it has to be tailored to each organization, and it has to be tailored to each individual application. So it needs somebody in the organization that can actually take that on, and it kind of can manifest in a couple of different ways. Is either you can hire that talent out that can come in and learn your organization, maybe has the broader picture of the things and can help learn your organization and tailor it, or maybe you hire somebody in to do that, or you retask somebody in your organization. So the challenges with internal is if you're retasking, most organizations don't have vast amounts of people sitting around with nothing to do, just looking for extra work. They're all overworked, understaffed, and to give them another hat is going to be a half-hearted attempt in innovating in here. So you really do need to dedicate some resources into learning what these things are and how it applies to your organization, and then put some equity and time and money and support and executive support into actually getting started with something. Did that answer your question?
I work for healthcare, and I'm interested to know whether, from your experience, is it better to have a bottom-up approach where the people have the ideas and start innovating and then try and influence up, or is it better to have more kind of strategic intention to deploy the innovation and then for that to go down? So is there somewhere in the middle? So from your experience, where's the best kind of model?
I think, again, it would depend on what the application is. Are you looking for external influence, so it's something that you're taking out into the marketplace, or it's internal, such as education or processes? It could be both, and it's typically, it needs what we would call in the military top cover. It needs executive support. There's a lot of great things happening in organizations that the leadership doesn't fully understand, and they end up getting undercut or not supported. And so that can stifle innovation and stifle growth significantly. There's plenty of examples of that where they're doing amazing things, but their funding gets cut, or they just don't get support, or they can't do, or they don't get the staff, and that growth and that trajectory gets killed. And then from a talent perspective too, you're going to lose that talent if they don't feel supported, and then there's a whole talent war component of that. So the executive or the leadership staff at minimum needs to engage with this stuff. It needs to start understanding from a strategic perspective. I would venture to say that most organizations at the lower level are already aware of some of this stuff. They just haven't had the time or the funding or the support to actually start building and exploring some of it. So I'd venture to say that it's most likely already in most organizations at the bottom level. It just needs to be cultivated in a deliberate way too. So being very strategic, utilize innovation ecosystems, utilize good R&D practices, starting small, picking an area, starting small, and growing it from there. But probably a both approach. And I'd say one more thing on the leadership perspective. It's not kind of a set it and forget it type thing. They need to be active in understanding that, especially as it grows. Without the risk of getting further into the innovation side, there's an awareness component that has to happen. So it can't happen in isolation. There's an ecosystem even in there that there's organizations. So there's incredible stuff happening at Northwest Regional College, at Ulster University, up in Northwest Ireland, at McGee campus. But there's a lot of isolation, and that people just aren't aware of what other people are doing, and crystallizing that, bringing those teams together, helping reinforce each other, there can be significant value into. Most people don't put enough value in the, we'll call it marketing, but just the engagement piece, the awareness piece of what's happening and why. And without that, it loses oxygen and oftentimes either struggles to stay alive or just gets snuffed out altogether. So the oxygen is awareness. Get out in the community, work on your marketing strategies. Sometimes that needs help because those internal teams, those R&D teams or those build teams, they've got just enough to try and build the product, and that's not really their expertise, but somebody else to come in and help them propagate that message and evangelize it and create awareness for it so that they can continue to get life breathed back into it. So that's an important component.
I have a question about the training. Fantastic training. I can see that application in different sectors where there are labour shortages. I just wondered about, you said about people who do this training, at their convenience whenever it's possible. Whenever it's possible, they could do this training. I'm just wondering, the example that we saw on the screen, the guy was in an area where there seemed to be like all this equipment around him and he had the headset. So is that movable? Could you do that at home, or would the person have to go into this particular unit with this equipment around him to do this type of training? I mean, just how flexible is that type of training?
So that video was a marketing video for them, in that that wall was for show. I've got that simulation actually on a headset here. We could do it right here, and so it simulates it. So yeah, the first time I saw that, I was like, is that wall? That was just for show for them. But no, it's completely digital in that they can go through the entire thing in the headset.
Gina, no, I'm generally the contrarian in conversation, so I have a bit of a concern about all this. In the context of, I can see in an industrial setting, in a pure educational setting, or anywhere else I'd be listening to saying that's fantastic, but in the context of the Peace Plus program, I'm a bit concerned, right? First, as you will tell very easily, I grew up for most of my life where there was social and no media. So social meant interpersonal contact. That was the only contact, apart from a telephone, in a house if you were lucky, right? And you found your girlfriend and your parents were listening as you talked to her at the bottom of the stairs every night. Who remembers that? But social media's come along, and I can understand most of you in this room are used to interacting with other people in that media. But now you seem to have evolved the word empathy as well into this space. And I have a real difficulty when you have a process piece plus whose top cover is politics. And the aim of the process is actually to bring people together, share real experiences, because that's the only thing that will overcome the embedded legacy of their past experiences. You're in the military, you know what I'm talking about. Violence has a real effect on people, which goes way beyond the injury to be corrected in any video that they might see, or the medical people might, no matter how high their expertise. I just think there's a real difficulty here, sort of for the organization, that a lot of individual projects might leap at this and think, hey, this is a great thing, like you were saying, we can link up people to connect our training in 4 or 5. But hang on, what does it contribute to the objective of Peace Plus, which goes beyond the important functionality of that training? But does it really bring people together for the kind of shared experience which helps them to overcome past experience, right? And I mean, I'm not deliberately wanting to have the conversation with Gina, but in the early days of the peace building process, a lot was about what happened after the training session, when kids had to mix, when they had to share their own individual backgrounds, and we were saying about what happened to my grandparents or my parents or whatever. And I'm just wondering, the scary bit of this is, yes, it must be engaged with, but isn't that going to be difficult for an organization like the SEUP to figure out, well, hold on a minute, where are we able to evaluate where this augmented reality is merely reinforcing the reality that we're meant to be in place to alter, right? And I think that's something, I think it's going to be a conversation, obviously, to have. And luckily, I just come along every 6 months and observe how Gina's getting on and dealing with it all the time. But I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
So it's a great question. There's multiple aspects of that. Nothing replaces in person. Nothing. The feeling the wind on your face, standing somewhere, the personal interactions, the energy we feel, empathy, we've been trying to do that over digital mediums since there's been we do that in writing letters, we do that in books, we try and capture empathy over digital technologies. We're doing it when we do marketing videos, and we pull at the heartstrings. You haven't called your mom in 3 months, now sign up for AT&T digital services. Empathy over digital technologies is nothing new. There's veins of what so the social components, there's a lot of concern about, and rightfully so, with any of the technologies. If it's replacing social interaction that actually is occurring in real life, there's potential social ramifications with that are manifesting right now with social media, where some of this technology, such as virtual reality or augmented reality, meant to enhance where it's not actually possible. So for the training component, that's meant to enhance the actual in-person when it actually comes to. You can't do that in real life at scale. For the meeting up in virtual simulations, for the collaboration component, the way we were meeting prior to that was phone calls or video chats, because it's required. You need to have some sort of interaction. It's just most people are admittedly so Zoom fatigued, Skype fatigued, Google Meets fatigued. It's losing any effectiveness already. We're trying over digital because we're more dispersed, more than we ever have been, and probably increasingly so. These are meant to alleviate some of that, in that we're not as effective. We need to communicate. We're going to continue to communicate over digital. Some of this stuff from the social component, in that you're collaborating for a purpose, or you're doing things in virtual reality with a purpose for a targeted objective. You can't do that in real life. You can't get them together. And there are the social components of, I can see your mannerisms and I connect you. So we did this, one of those where we sent the headsets out was after a few months of COVID, everybody had been locked down. So those teams had never come back together and seen each other. They used to see each other in the office frequently. And they did kind of a social get-together where they all put on headsets and met each other on Mars and had videos and were dancing around. And if you were doing that every day in place of human interaction, there's probably something to worry about. That took something that was not possible in real life and brought them together. And even people that they haven't experienced anything like that because they were in another country. So there's 100% applications, but it's really about it's doing the things that we're not already doing in real life. We can't do in real life for multiple reasons. That's where it's leaping that boundary, and the empathy, connection, creating the storytelling. So there is an experience that it was the first revolution in me understand. So I love history. I toured all kinds of museums and stuff growing up, and I just have that deep connection to seeing and physically touching, and nothing replaces being on a battlefield or picking up that object. It's one of the things that kind of opened my eyes or revolutionized my perspective on how these technologies can do or enhance things is there's an experience on the Oculus Quest, the Anne Frank house. So that is it's free out on the Oculus Store, but you put the headset on and you're standing in Anne Frank's house, and sections, excerpts of her story from her diary are read by a girl about her same age. And she guides you through, and you pull open, you feel the creak on the floor, you hear it anyway, and you pull open the library bookcase, and you kind of duck under where they had you, and you're standing. She's like, hey, this is where I used to sleep. And you can feel how cramped it was, and you kneel down, you can pick up a little book or eyeglasses, look under the bed. The connection and the narrative story I haven't been to the Anne Frank house. I would love to do it. I've never been able to. The connection to that story, you feel emotionally, you feel as though you're there. You can, more than just visualize, you envision yourself because you're standing there when she talks about we had to be quiet about coughing because we couldn't let the people underneath. There's no way that I would have been able to fully understand that to that depth as though if I were standing there in the actual museum, I could have, but I haven't had that opportunity yet. I'm in the United States going through a simulation of that, and that story resonates with me because I feel what she's feeling as close as I could, going through in that narrative storytelling and understanding perspectives, also in a safe space. I don't have any contrary opinions or influences or biases there outside of the experience. So being able to attach people to locations and then different times and periods, and I hear in the simulation, cars on the street as she's talking about and things from that time, you can transport people for empathy creation. So I'll take all your time up. Talk about geeky stuff. So there's another simulation that was created a few years back about the homeless in San Francisco. And this is where the empathy components started to come in that. So there's a program in San Francisco, a large homeless population, where they allow homeless people to get on the buses at night and where it's warm, and they can ride the bus around San Francisco to stay warm at night. And so there's this whole simulation, and it takes you through the process of becoming homeless. And you're originally in your apartment, and you've been laid off, and you're looking for a job, and there's a report on the radio talking about people getting laid off, and the rent collector comes by and is asking for the rent is due, and you have a little pile of cash that's not enough, and so you have to physically go through the process. I'm going to sell this in my house, that house, and you start to get the experience of you're selling your personal items to make rent, and spoiler alert, you can't sell enough to make rent, and so then you find yourself in your own car and you're looking around and you start to embody that presence. I'm sitting here in my car and the windows are all fogged up, and eventually you make your way and you're on the city bus and you're looking around, you're trying to protect your valuables. But one of the things that they did in there is they put people kind of positioned throughout the bus, and you're the components of emotional, physiological, psychological, believing you're there, you start to emotionally connect emotional behavior and experientially to that scenario as though you're there. You see these people in the bus, and it allows you to click on them, and they represent actual homeless people, and it tells their story in their words. And so the first one you click on, and it's a lady that she's like, hey, I was in an abusive relationship, I had a good job, but I couldn't stay there anymore. Because there's there's a bias towards, well, these are just derelicts in society, they're all just drug users, and they're in their own position because of the choices they made, and there's no or little empathy for the homeless people. And that might be the case for some, but that's not for others, and so that's part of what they were wanting to establish. And so you click on, she's talking about, yeah, I lost my job. I had to leave that situation. I just haven't been mentally able, so I ride the buses every night. And you click on another one, and it tells her story. And there's one in the back, and that was the one that, maybe it's because of my parent that it grabbed me the most, but there's a guy, and you see a figure laying on the back row, and it says, hey, yeah, I'm a dad, and this is my 10-year-old son. We ride the bus every night, and after he gets off from school, we go do our things, we get on the bus, we travel around the city, and it takes us to the school, and we drop off in the morning time. And it's my wife died a couple years ago, and it just crushed me so, and I just mentally couldn't get over it, and I lost my job, and we lost our house, and like it grips you, and you feel like you're sitting there listening to the story and being in that. So to be able to take, is that scenario, could you collect those people? Could you put people, you'd never be able to go out to San Francisco. It's not safe. You wouldn't ride that bus probably. To be able to transfer those stories and connect people to stories, real or imagined, virtual reality or augmented reality, 3D, we understand, we connect with it. But you can take them to different points in time that no longer exist and show transitions or show emotion and connect empathy and understand context around situations that will be really difficult. Dial the clocks back to the Troubles and put them in a scenario where they're in the midst, bring out stories. Augmented reality, it comes up and you can scroll through a timeline where you see things melt away and things come up. That's scalable. It's on a piece of paper, on a digital scan, a phone, and it pops up, and so you can tell stories in the ways that we've just never been able to do before. Those, I think, 100% are showing incredible capabilities of being able to connect people beyond just 2D than what we have. To your other point about replacing social interaction to where we don't go out inside and play with our friends or go out and do those things, 100% everybody should be cautious about those. As it gets into AI, when we get the personal chat bots, I again would encourage everybody to go out and look at Tristan Harris's stuff. Any of his interviews, I think it was the AI Dilemma, was released in March 9th. Cautions a lot of this stuff. There's incredible possibilities with AI. There's also incredible risks with it. And everybody should be looking at AI. Everybody should start having conversations about it to understand it and start having conversations about both positive and negative implications. Those personal AI assistants are going to be incredible. It's going to reaffirm you. Human relations are messy. We don't always agree with each other. When you have this thing that's constantly on, always ready for you, affirming you, telling you that there's significant risk in deteriorating human relations through that. Why would I engage with another human? I could even probably have this chatbot communicate with your chatbot and never have to talk to you. So there's 100% real risk to human social experiences that everybody should be talking about. But ultimately, explore. Everybody needs to learn, explore. There's 100% real capabilities and aspects that will be revolutionary with all of this. There's also concerns and risks with any of it too. Just explore it and smartly go into it. But I think there's a lot of use cases to support and alleviate your fears on that for people deliberately and intelligently exploring and building. We just always should keep a cautious and risk, mindset on. Did that help or hurt?
Well, I totally agree. We would encourage this to enhance the project and to enhance that relationship building by using the likes of VR, even different business examples of our young people projects where different communities come together and they learn about each other's culture. You can actually do this now through augmented reality and walking through and really taking a day in the life of, like we saw the example, if we bring in one of the projects with the new communities, day in life of somebody in Syria. I see so many possibilities for training, and these would all be engaging with people more, especially young people, maybe more disadvantaged young people who are living on sort of streets. The thought of doing all this training using this type of technology is going to be more attractive to them than sitting down pages. And even the healthcare and the cross-border health schemes, because of our geography here, to be able to use some of this to take it to the most rural aspects across the island, to be able to do training and healthcare, park her up in the car park in the hospital up in Donegal, and run these training schemes. You know, I think it's about how you use it. It's not, as Travis said, it's not about replacing the relationship building, it's about enhancing the experience of the people involved in the project. So that's how I see it.
I think even for accessibility, we are seeing most people have the same equal access, either from a rural perspective or ability and mobility. I think for some of the projects, there's less mobility issues or disabilities. They very rarely get the opportunity to partake in things like this because they are just, either from an accessibility perspective or from a rurality, they just don't have the opportunity. So this type of technology has a place to level that playing field, so they can actually come on board in a similar setting as everyone else as well.
And I think one of the components in there is engagement. It's half the battle. Are we going to get, so whether it's middle-aged, 30s, 40s, or younger, what we're doing now isn't moving the needle fast enough or effectively enough. So it's that clear vision component to where will the future be, but that's even not as relevant as now. We're already struggling to engage people and transfer knowledge and capture knowledge and upskill with what we're currently doing. Is that going to get better with the next generation and as time goes on using what we've currently done? I would say no. We're having challenges now. So rethinking or incorporating different things, testing, exploring, and measuring effectiveness, I think is vital for it. But engagement is half the battle. If you can't get them to engage with your 30-page document or video now, you're probably not going to be very successful in the future. And this challenge of upskilling, reskilling, communicating will become more acute and a persistent problem as opposed to something that we've solved, just hoping that they're going to eventually, we throw it at them, don't give them any other options, they're going to engage with it. So engagement is half the battle.
My name's Emma. I work in the hospital, the Royal, not far from here, and I'm involved in stroke rehabilitation. So this is, thank you Travis for your presentation, this has reinvigorated me for my project. We're planning to kind of use this to make neuroplastic changes within the brain and engage our patients more. Repetition and task-specific activities is what drives brain plasticity and makes changes to the brain. And for my stroke patients who that area of the brain is damaged and we need to fire up and bring online the other bits of the brain to take over what's been damaged, we're finding sort of VR is maybe a good way to engage our patients but also provide the 6 hours of recommended therapy a day. So for us as therapists, I can't provide 6 hours of therapy a day. It's impossible. So we're planning to use this as an adjunct to our therapy and use it for lots of self-directed therapy for the patients. The problem we have in the health service is we think big, act small, move very slow. So that has reinvigorated me. I'm going to knock a few doors when I go back. So thank you for your presentation.
Are you connected with the McGee campus and what they're doing with VR and EEG monitoring?
We're with
XRT.
XRT down at the Ulster University of Jordanstown. They're not up.
I think it's McGee.
They're
Maybe let's talk offline. So I just saw an incredible lab that's doing incredible work monitoring brain interactions with the EEG in conjunction with VR. Incredible work and very talented, and there might be an opportunity to connect. So some of the things, innovation ecosystem, and getting into Catalyst's world, innovation ecosystems have stakeholders, and the stakeholders all have a role to play, and there's typically common stakeholders in those systems, in that there's typically government, there's media, there's universities, there's financial capital, entrepreneurs. Each one of them have something to give back to the ecosystem, but they need something from the others that they can't get for themselves. And so deliberately developing those innovation ecosystems where you bring those people together to share, collaborate, evolve, work together, there might be opportunities. So the universities, for example, need real world projects and things that they can work on, and they have research, they have development teams. They're also a funnel for skilling the workforce and the communities. So coming in through university where they can touch and play and learn, connecting them to real world use cases in industry, or whether it's entrepreneurs or organizations or corporations, which is another stakeholder who need labor and talent and expertise, they can naturally partner together to assist each other and help each other, where the corporations don't have the manpower, maybe the time or the effort or the R&D. Well, the university needs those interactions. So there's a potential great opportunity there too. And then don't forget the awareness piece. Does anybody, how many people and how far and wide do they know what you're doing? Some of that propagation, whether it's taking out to innovation centers or getting it out in front of the community, marketing components, the propagation of what you're doing can actually find people who can help or bring in different ideas where they're maybe looking for or didn't even know you existed, or maybe they are philanthropically connected with what you're doing, that you can find assistance through that too to help with whatever maybe it's something that you know you need or you didn't even know you need. So don't discount the messaging component.
It's terrible if somebody has to come from Texas to make connections for 100 miles down the road.
But yeah, it speaks to your earlier point about that networking and silos. We need to share awareness. But any other questions or comments?
I work in the development of pencils, and I can see possibilities all over this. So hopefully we're going to try and raise the level of aspirations of our small businesses and to be more innovative in like the economy. And I can see all of this being a catalyst to trying to raise those aspirations, and if businesses can do it in a safe way where they're not taking risk and they're maybe coming into a centre, say, and using these types of things, seeing and getting support to align their business processes and stuff, then there's an opportunity for them to integrate this in the long term into their businesses. That would be great. And similarly with education, having children myself, it's, I'm being in education myself, how much do you take in being told? It's like you said, that impact piece where you actually done something, you've made a mistake, that's how you learn. So yeah, I think it's fascinating.
So the small and medium-sized businesses, those have the potential to be the most negatively impacted by all of this, in that larger organizations typically have R&D teams, have some innovation teams, have budget against them. Does it work all the time? But a lot of times they're better prepared, or at least exploring and playing with these things. The small and medium-sized businesses, they don't have that depth of innovation and money, and they're focused on their next product, their customer base, keeping the lights on. And so if they're not aware of what these things are, how it's manifesting itself throughout the marketplace, how it could negatively sideswipe them, or how they could potentially leverage it to create or enhance what they're currently doing, enhance it or create new markets for them, it will happen to them. And if it happens to them, it's most likely not going to be positive. It will be negative disruption. So it's more important for them, I think more than most, to plug into this stuff, but that goes back to the innovation ecosystem. They're going to need help. They're going to need people who have thought leadership, who are exploring with this. Small communities, start with the small communities where they have strength in relationships, build it from there, bring those innovation ecosystems and those stakeholders together so they can support and help the small and medium-sized businesses have the potential to be most negatively impacted if they don't get that assistance, but being deliberate about that. So I think it's an incredible opportunity for them too, to potentially offset. So some of the positive components of ChatGPT, everybody should be cautious about it, but some of the positive components is anything repetitive, writing papers, handling research, it's offloading. So me as maybe a business owner or a certain industry have certain skill sets or things that demand my attention, and maybe there's mundane or menial work that's really not taking advantage of my skill sets, but it's required. The large language models and the chat GPTs are showing incredible possibilities of offloading just menial tasks, menial research, menial writing. Can you create, I need to do 25 social media posts about this potential topic or whatever, and write me an entire campaign, write me a social media post about this and create a schedule for it for the next 2 weeks. And then go in and tweak it or tailor it. It might not be perfect, but it takes what would have been 2 or 3 hours maybe of work to just get your awareness and social media campaign done in about 30 seconds. You go through, retweak, give me an algorithm to post, and so stuff like that showing incredible possibilities for offloading menial tasks. So those types of things, it requires exploration, it requires understanding, and for a lot of them, it requires help from their community.
Skills on how to use ChatGPT. Okay, well, what's your question for that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of feedback on that. Just with, obviously, we're funding program that's a one-off piece of funding that people are getting, and one of the things that we're really interested in projects bringing is sustainability and legacy of that. And what are some of the risks around getting this kind of initial injection in introducing this technology, given how fast the technology moves? How can we kind of support projects in being sustainable in the way that they're using and integrating these technologies, where they may end up pulling, particularly in something like the NHS and health services, where funding is such a challenge, or the voluntary community sector, bringing in technology that maybe they might have a challenge sustaining later on?
So it depends on the application. If it's like a VR or something, is it external or market facing, or is it internal innovation? How is it being used? If it's a training program, so that's one of the components that has to be carefully looked at for logistics component of an internal training program. So it's one thing to create a virtual reality training simulation and get it up and running. Somebody has to manage that too. There's potentially updates that need to occur throughout time. Most people haven't put a VR headset on yet. And so it's not a, hey, here's your headset, go over there and get it. You need to safety considerations and kind of walk them through, navigate, especially first time experience. If you have multiple headsets, a mobile device management system, there's companies out there that handle this, but instead of you having to take each device and updating it, and you can have the entire suite of devices, 20, 30, 50, 100 devices, all in one software application. You can push and pull programs, update, refresh, see what they're doing, troubleshoot off of one software system. So there's definitely a lot of logistics that go into deploying any of this, and then a change management component too, which is a lot of engagement and preparation. That's where the start small component comes into play. Pick something, start small, take one training program, a targeted audience, make sure that you're measuring KPIs, what will make this successful, do a prototype or a pilot program before you, aspirations, we're going to have an entire VR training, whatever. Maybe you start with one skill. With the roadmap laid out, well, here's where we're going, here's where we're going to measure the success or failure of this, and we're going to determine after 3 months if we're moving the needle one direction or the other, being very smart about the logistics components. So some of that, again, it's going to, regardless of whether it's AR or blockchain, or you need somebody who can help shepherd that. And it's either going to come, it can be both. It's either going to come from external counsel, essentially, external entities coming in and then learning your challenge and your organization and helping you develop and craft and manage that. Or it's going to come from internal, where they have the ability, they know the organization, they know the challenge, they just need to learn those things. Sometimes you can find in the organization that you already have both. There's a lot of organizations that do have both, just none of the leadership realizes that it's even happening. And so they're not getting any support and it's being stifled. But tailoring all of this comes, one, learning what's out there that will help guide or shape what are we trying to accomplish that we're not able to accomplish with what we're currently doing. Pick an area to start with and plan it out. But you can't just throw technology at things. The change management process has to happen. The business process has to happen. And that's where it helps if you start small, because it's manageable. Start with one thing and then look to scale it from there. Did I answer your question? Yeah, it's going to take guidance, somebody to help lead and shepherd, because there's not clear-cut answers for all of it. There are answers. People are obviously deploying solutions and being very successful with it. It's just going to take internal support and somebody to dedicate effort towards it, and you have to tailor it to whatever your need is. There's not a VR, AR, mixed reality isn't right for everything. But for the things that it is, there's no replacement for it. Any of these technologies isn't just inherently right for whatever problems you have. That's why you have to at least have a base knowledge of them and then understand what the problem that you're facing, what your desired outcome, and then pick the right area and then go from there. So you just need some talent in there that's either willing to learn or can learn, or that can come externally and help. These are all great conversations. I love seeing that people are interested and excited, and there's a lot of great stuff happening in Northern Ireland and in the universities, and a lot of people exploring and pushing the bounds. That's a big challenge for most communities, organizations, and a lot of them are just starting. There's a lot of stuff already happening here, and there's a lot of interest, and that's ultimately at the stage that we're in. The conversations need to happen, the exploration, determining what's right, what's not, exploring, building, testing now, and staying plugged into it, and just the general awareness and having the conversations of what's right and what's not and what's appropriate, how could we do it, how are we going to measure it. All of those, from my perspective, are happening here. So you've got a head start in a lot of places. Now just bringing it together, funding it, maybe becoming more aware, plugging it in, and starting more of those R&Ds and finding those places where it's already happening and cultivating that and bringing it to life more, pouring the gasoline on the little fires. But the encouraging thing is you guys have a lot of that here already. And so it's just a matter of orchestrating it appropriately. But I see big things happening from Northern Ireland. It's going to be great. Yeah.